Hello, everybody, and welcome to the last episode of Huntsville Huddle. I'm your host, Don Meyer, and today we have Coach Dina. She's an assistant strength coach, and she kind of dabbles with every sport, but her main sport is tennis. She was a former tennis player here, and now she gets to help with their strength conditioning. Coach Dina, how you doing today?
Great. Just trying to stay dry with this crazy rain
No
outside.
kidding. So the funniest thing, not funny, but, we get a lot of people, we have a lot of interviews, and, some are out of state and some are from a lot of different places, but not only you out of state, but you're from out of the country. You're from the United Kingdom. So what
Yeah.
part of England were you from?
So yeah, I'm from, as you guys say, across the pond. I'm from London, so the capital of England, from North London. And so just to give you guys a rough idea, kind of like how like the Woodlands is to Houston. So
Okay.
North London suburb. Yeah.
So when you hear about England, you kind of know that soccer is really the big sport and so many other things, but you're a tennis player.
Yeah.
So how did you get into tennis? Was it a young age? Was it through, what was it through a friend, a parent? What made you want to do tennis, especially in a place where kind of soccer is the main sport?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I had a tennis racket in my hand as soon as I was born, pretty much. My dad introduced it to me, and when I was a kid and I wasn't strong enough to hold a proper racket, he gave me like a plastic one, and he would push all the chairs in the living room and the dining room to the side, and he would make a net with some other furniture, and we would like play with a sponge ball in the living room. But I mean, the reason why I got into tennis was, I played a bunch of sports growing up. My dad was like a sportsman, so he exposed me to a lot of different sports. But with tennis was soccer or football, but the main reason why I didn't really commit to football was because soccer, was because my dad was more of a soccer player, and he was a goalkeeper, and he was exposed to like a lot of concussions, a lot of different injuries, and he tried to keep me away from that. And I really just fell in love with tennis. My dad would take me to Wimbledon every year, and we would just have a ground pass and be there all day. I just fell in love with it.
And, before we go on to kind of talk about you specifically, it seems that in the tennis world, a lot of players from England have kind of, developed, and a lot of the famous tennis players seem to be coming from that area. So what do you think it is with, the United Kingdom and England that tennis is all of a sudden becoming such a big sport? Do you think it's because of injuries, or you just think that because of lack of, other sports like baseball and football, it's just kind of falling to either, like you said, soccer or maybe tennis?
It's an interesting question. I mean, the primary sports in the United Kingdom are, of course, like you said, soccer, but then there's also rugby. So that's kind of like your main contact sport that's equivalent to like American football over here. And then tennis being your primary non-contact sport. And I think with the recent success of professional tennis players like Andy Murray and Emma Raducanu, like she won the US Open, I believe this year, and she's 19, 20 years old. I think with the success from these professional tennis players, we've seen a lot more growth in tennis. And actually, the fact that college athletics is so big in the United States, I think junior tennis players are pushing to continue to compete at a high level so that they can get the opportunity to actually come to the United States and earn a tennis scholarship.
Yeah, so that's actually was going to be my next question was, so how does it work for you in high school, you want to be a tennis player, and was it your goal to come to America to play? And how does it work? Do you have high school sports? Do you do something like, because, for me, for football in junior college or junior high in California, we didn't have, junior high football in Texas. So we had to go through like a club program. So did you have something like that in England? How did that work, and how did it go for you?
Yeah, so it kind of started once I entered high school. So when I was deciding which high school I wanted to go to, I applied for a couple of private schools that had a really good tennis program, but it didn't actually work out. So I ended up going to my local public school called Winchmore. It was literally like a 10-minute walk from my house. And so being that I was at a public school, all my hours, from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. I was at school. But once I reached a certain level in tennis, I had to start to devote more time to my craft. So that involved me having to join a tennis academy, a local tennis academy, and I'd be there before. I'd wake up, I'd go to the weight room, to the gym, work out before school. I'd go to school, I'd finish, and then I'd go back to the academy and hit the courts for 2-3 hours. And then after that happened, I reached a certain point where I'm like, man, I'm really maxing out my hours every day and all week, but I still feel like I'm behind compared to the juniors that I'm competing against. And so that's when college tennis came about on my radar. The opportunity to get your school paid for, get a degree, and then you're training 20 hours a week. So that was perfect in my eyes. The opportunity was there, and as soon as I found out about it, I signed up. I was like, I want to play NCAA athletics.
Yeah, and it's crazy that you say that, because you kind of experienced the college athlete life, in high school. So were there a lot of pressure with that? Because, you're, as a younger kid, you're having to kind of manage a schedule of working out and then going to practice and going to school. So was there any pressure behind that, or once you got used to it, it kind of became a simple thing?
Yeah, I wouldn't say there wasn't any pressure. I mean, I had a great support system. Like my sister, who's 10 years older than me, she would drag me out of bed in the morning to go to the gym with her, even though I didn't want to. And I would take public transport to my tennis club to train in the afternoons and evenings. So it's kind of like that schedule was already ingrained in me. But when I came to the States, it was the same, but like the intensity just increased, like the level increased, as opposed to the nature of it.
So how does recruiting work you're in club tennis,
Okay.
You want to come to America, and so I assume Sam Houston in Huntsville probably wasn't the first school you ever heard of. You probably heard of all the big name schools. So how does it work?
Yeah.
How does recruiting work? Did you get a chance to maybe come out and see schools, or did you just kind of have to see it online and then test your luck and get here?
So I don't know if you actually know this, but I actually transferred to Sam Houston from the University of Houston.
Okay.
So I was recruited by the University of Houston and another school in Cincinnati, Ohio. So what happened was, as soon as I noticed that college athletics was on my radar, and I wanted to do it, I was picked up by a recruiting agency that's based in England, and they helped me through the process. And so one of the steps was me having to record myself playing or competing and upload it to YouTube. And so what then happens, the recruiting agency uploads that link to their database of coaches from Division 1, Division 2, like different schools from across the country, and then they reach out to you. I had about 30 plus schools reach out to me, and then I filtered it down to 2. Those 2 schools was U of H and Xavier University in Cincinnati. And I just coordinated with the 2 schools. They both offered me a recruit visit, actually. So I flew out to Xavier first, and then spent 2 days there, and then flew out to Houston, spent another 2 days there, and I really enjoyed my recruit visit to both schools. But the environment that I noticed at Houston at the time was incredible, and I said this is what I want to be around. And then my junior year, I transferred to Sam Houston, and then here we are today.
Yeah. So when you're looking at all those schools, and like you said, you had 30 plus, and I don't know how aware of you were of just kind of different schools in the States, but what made you bring it down to Xavier and Houston? What were factors you were looking for that you wanted to go to that school?
That's a good question. I mean, initially it's that relationship with the coach, and then also location. Being that I'm from London, that stereotypical bad weather, rainy weather like we have today, I just had enough of it. So initially, yes, it was that relationship with the coach and with the teammates, because I could also speak to the girls on the team. So that's what narrowed it down to those two schools. And then once it got to the recruit visit, it was, okay, what's the feeling that I'm getting from this school, in the program? And then it ultimately just came down to Houston being the place where it was going to push me the most, and it was a challenge, and I always take the path least traveled, so it was a great experience, and I'm happy that I went with that decision.
So, you're in the States now, you've transferred to Sam Houston. Kind of talk to me about your time as a player, and coming in from a different country, was it weird? And, probably had a lot of people ask about your accent and ask about all these different questions, so were you a little nervous coming in and being the foreign student, and how did it go playing at Houston and at Sam Houston?
Yeah, that's always a conversation starter, like, especially my accent. But honestly, the biggest culture shock was, I kid you not, crossing a road. Because we drive on the other side of the road. So when I initially got here, I would always look to the right first and then to the left. And on so many occasions, there would be a car maybe 30, 40 yards away. I'd take one step on the road and I hear it coming. I'm like, oh, I have to step back. So yeah, that was the biggest culture shock. But in terms of was I nervous? I kind of embraced that independence. I felt like this was an opportunity that I've been waiting for a while. So it's almost like I just had tunnel vision and didn't care about anything else. But I really enjoyed every moment, and it wasn't as big of a shock that people usually think it is. But yeah, I always get asked to say funny things with my accent, which has actually been diluted because I've been over here for 5 years now.
Yeah. Well, it seemed to be worth it because you did get a ring out of it, a championship.
Yep.
But now we're kind of transitioning into the coaching life. What made you decide that you wanted to become a strength coach? Is that something you always wanted to do and you knew you were going to do as a player, or just kind of something that as you was a player, you kind of figured out maybe there's something you'd be good at? Yeah,
so during my transfer process from Houston to Sam Houston, I had a semester where I was just taking classes. I wasn't competing. And I took that opportunity to do an internship with the strength and conditioning department at University of Houston. And honestly, it came down to the reason why I wanted to get into coaching was specifically strength and conditioning coaching, was seeing the impact that my previous strength and conditioning coaches had on me. I've always been a tennis coach, back home. I know I can coach tennis, but there's something special about strength and conditioning where, you're able to have that variety. There's the variety of athletes. You're not just working with tennis players. You're not just working with soccer players. You're working with a multitude of athletes, and you're able to impact them in not just their sport, but in life as well, if that relationship occurs. And I'm a big people person. I love relationships, so it seemed very fitting.
And then my final question for you, now that you've kind of been into the strength life, what's the difference between, because you help the football team, you're always with us, so
yeah.
I don't think a tennis player needs to be maxing 500 on squats. So what's the difference between a football player and a tennis player? What is something that you have to change for each team, given that each team has a different body type?
Yeah. So, of course, tennis players aren't getting ran by 200, 300-pound men. So, the biggest difference, obviously, we don't need to train for collision. So, the neck prevention stuff that we do with you guys, we don't necessarily have to do that with tennis players. We don't have to, like you said, max out on squat and bench as much as you guys do. But there's actually a couple of similarities in that tennis requires short bursts of energy over a long period of time. Same thing with football. You guys have to have short bursts of explosive energy over a long period of time on and off. And even with like change of direction, like the agility and change of direction stuff, we actually do very similar stuff on the field that we would do with you guys on the field. But yeah, we're not maxing out on bench and squat every day, or every week, should I say.
Well, we really appreciate you having on the show. It's cool to see, a different perspective on somebody that's not even from America. And we always love having you around the football team and all the other sports.
It's a pleasure.
This was the last episode of Huntsville Huddle. We really appreciate everyone listening, and shout out to the crew and the producers for everything that you do. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.